Hi, it's spring break, but it's Friday and I miss you. So I thought I would do some follow-up notes on some of the things that I'm hearing in your write-ups, assignment 3 and 5 from your qualitative reading. Anyway, the two topics I wanted to hit on were the idea of axial coding, that's that second tier of coding, and validation. Okay, so what I'm hearing in your reviews of the um, qualitative articles or book is that you like it when the authors let the data speak. Eric makes a good point on this. And when they provide support from lots of different sources, a kind of layering of explanation. That's another way of saying what Geertz used the phrase of thick description as layering of description between the literature, the data, multiple sources of data in order to build the assertion that you're making, the theme. And we all get a bit irritated when assertions seem a bit too neat or don't have rich data attached to them, or at least we should. And this is one of the things I want to get to because sometimes you'll find in your when you're reading articles that you'll find an article where things seem to be very scientifically organized. And for those of you who like things to be neat and tidy, you'll think, oh, this is really good because look how everything is very clear and everything is very scientific. That always makes me a little worried because if it's that scientific, then where's the humanity? Where's the interpretation and the peopledom? Anyway, so one of the things I think that happens is that people do open coding, but they don't quite get to the point of axial coding. So that's what I wanted to talk about first. Open coding, if you remember, is the process when you organize your data, when you go through the first couple of readings where you figure out how to organize the different chunks of data, and you start to label it, you start to give it names, and you start to come up with categories. And in your mind, even if you don't write it down, you already are starting to have this typology in your head. This part can feel very satisfying. You get to a point of contentment because you can get a real sense of ownership of your data, and it should feel like a biological taxonomy, very very scientific. I don't know about you all, but I love lists. They always make me feel far more in control of the world around me. However, listing it is what you're doing to the data. The idea that somehow by coming up with categories and lists and getting your data all managed very neatly, that somehow that's making it more scientific. It's not. It's just making it more etic because you are controlling it more. And what you need to do is to go back to that's reducing the data. What you need to go back to is this expanding the data. And that means finding the relationships between things. Axial coding refers to the ways that the different categories, labels, whatever you want to call it, that you're finding in your work are related to one another. And it's the next level, the more abstract level of coding and analysis. So here's an example of a very straightforward version of axial codes. Those are across the top: vocabulary, study management, oral discrimination, and stress. And then the corresponding open codes, the things that make up vocabulary and pace of vocabulary, are the things that are related under the larger category of vocabulary. So here's a good example. So what's the difference between the open code of vocabulary that you see over here on the left-hand side and the axial code of vocabulary? Well, the axial code is a more abstract version. So I can't even remember where I got this chart, but the researcher has some ideas in her head, and perhaps has memoed out some explanations of what the meta-category of vocabulary means relative to the ideas and things that are in that particular column, and so on and so forth. A better example is I found online. Let's see if we can go there. Yep, here it is. The site is prpost.wordpress.com, and it's, as it says, an example of how to perform open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. So the author gives Tiffany Gallicano, who I believe is, I think she's a student, but anyway, we'll have to look out who she is. Anyway, she gives a nice definition. Open coding, you read through your data several times, start to create tentative labels, categories, and so forth. And I like this point, and establish properties of each code so that you know what each code means. This is the kind of thing right here. That's the kind of thing that when someone says that they come up with a coding sheet and have kind of a formal version, especially if you're working in a group, this is the process you would do. Then axial coding, identifying relationships among the open codes. What are the connections among the codes? Okay, so that's what I was just referring to. This is a more abstract layer of coding. This is where you're actually expanding the data because you're finding connections between its discrete pieces. You're making the sum bigger than its parts. You're expanding it. And then she talks about selective coding, which is a term that I haven't heard used all that much, but it's basically one more layer up in terms of going back to the data again. As she says, figure out the core variable that includes all the data, then reread the transcripts and selectively code any data that relates to the core variable you identified. This is one of the places where when you're getting ready to write up, you might go back through your data looking for the really rich examples that help clarify the points that you're making. It does not mean that you are making the data fit your theory. The theory has already emerged from the data. Oops. This just means that you're going back to find the examples that help you illustrate what it is that you constructed from your analysis. Okay, so she shows how she did open coding for her first research question, and she has this list of open codes, such as wanting experiential learning. She explains what the properties of those codes are: seeking credentials, feeling ambitious, seeking excitement, being eager, and examples specifically from her transcripts. She does the same thing with another question, same thing with another question. Okay. Then the next stage is to go from open codes, for example, the first one we saw, wanting experiential learning, and finding the relationship between a set of open codes. In this case, she finds that the relationship between all of these things over on the left-hand side could be summed up as believing they are ready to be set loose on accounts. This other group, seeking external validation, so forth and so on. And then she gives a kind of a, you can see where that we're going up in abstraction. She classifies all of these things under the large idea of wanting to make a difference. So you could see where if she was doing a write-up, she might make the assertion that one of the things that these people want to do is that they want to make a difference. And then she would have all this evidence to go back to show how she came to that assertion. This is based on the Sharma's grounded theory that we've talked about before. So it shouldn't look unfamiliar. I just thought it was helpful to see another example, especially now that you've been reading some examples of analysis and thinking about how other people did analysis. If the author stays too tightly to just a simple categorization of codes without coming up with the relationship between them, the axial codes, it can tend to be a little too tidy, and it will feel like it's not speaking, that the data is not being heard as well. At least that's my opinion on that. Let's see if I can get back to, oh, here we are, good. Okay. Oop. Let me get back one. Okay, so validity. You've constructed a a set of relationships and given them names, the axial codes. You've identified the rich pieces of data to illustrate those relationships, but how do you know that the data you've generated is valid, or trustworthy or reliable, or insert your word that makes you feel nervous about whether you're doing the right thing?